Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Princeton University. I now call upon the first speaker from Princeton, Matt Saunders.
Mr. President, Madam Ambassador, Your Excellencies, friends, thank you for inviting Brian and myself to participate in this year's Transatlantic Debate Championship. It's a great joy that we could come all this way to debate a very important resolution for you. 100 years later, the United States has to stop policing the world. 100 years ago, when the United States was brought into the First World War, the next 100 years were spelled out for us. Our mission was to tell every country how to live, even though, as we know from last year's Transatlantic Debate Championship, America has no culture. We were going to teach everyone in the world to govern and how to be governed, even though as 100 years progressed, it was clear we did not know how to govern ourselves. And we were going to be there with an AK-47 and an aircraft carrier singing, "I am proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free," if you didn't listen to us. Ladies and gentlemen, I stand up here a product of 100 years of American arrogance as an arrogant American. That is why I have decided to come all this way to tell you as an authority on this subject why you must rule in our favor. America's problem for so long has been soft policing. Wars we were brought into, elaborate plans like Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, the creation of the League of Nations, leadership of the United Nations. But it quickly developed into hard policing. We entered sovereign territories where we were not welcome, like Korea and Vietnam, later Iraq and Afghanistan, to solve problems that only tangentially affected America. Today, Brian and I are going to tell you that it is not the responsibility of the United States, nor is it their province, to police the world. Brian will tell you that much of what America has done will come back to bite it. And it has left us in many ways worse off. But before that, I'm going to tell you that violation of national sovereignty is improper, and that America can be a friend to its allies without being an aggressor. Every sovereign nation has a right to protect itself and to govern itself. This principle is important in a world in which we exist peacefully, because many people have different morals and beliefs of what is right and wrong. But you seem to disagree.
The world needs the US to fight the Islamic State.
That is exactly the wrong point of view to be held. We believe that multilateralism is extremely important, that together, not alone, we can defeat any problems that we might see in the Islamic State. But by letting America do it on their own, or by assuming that America will just step in, we will all be left worse out. It's not to say that cultural relativism wins the day when we go into these countries and say that, we shouldn't be touching them. But it is to suggest that people approach national security differently. It would make no sense, but I will wait one moment. You disagree?
Given that the US was forced into the Second World War and during the Cold War was able to exert little influence, do you really believe that for the last 100 years it's been policing the world?
So what I would say is that without America in the Cold War, we would not have had a Cold War. We would likely have had a hot war. But more importantly, we look at the most important conflicts. We look at the Second World War, which, yes, we were brought into, the soft policing. But you see this big upscale in American power into wars like Iraq and Afghanistan of late. And I really think that the history does prove that we're right. Let me give you an example that we can understand our point. Let's say that I lived in a house and my neighbor was cooking bacon, and because I was Jewish, I didn't think that he should make bacon. Now, let's talk about this. Is it really fair for me to go over there and tell him he can't cook bacon? No. But if the sin-infused grease is about to start a fire that is going to burn down my house, then I can go over there and say something. Just like neighbors on a block, ladies and gentlemen, to coexist, the United States needs to respect that different countries will have conflicts and that only the ones that directly affect it are the ones in which it needs to fight. It isn't proper for us to tell other countries how to operate. Does anyone in this room want George W. Bush, a man who thinks there is no French word for entrepreneur, telling them what to do? The only time that America has a claim to interrupt a country's internal or external policies is if it will be directly harmed by those policies. Which transitions me into my second point. One argument America's leaders often make for entering conflict is we need to protect our allies. What's in their best interest is in ours. But we look at conflicts like that in Libya, getting rid of Gaddafi, or exerting pressure on the Mubarak regime in Egypt. None of these were likely to affect America in any tangible way. Our role with our allies should be like an older brother, not like a police officer. As an older brother, we tell our siblings not to do drugs and not to hang around people who do. We don't find every person that our siblings would ever contact who might have drugs, beat and arrest them, then fly to Afghanistan and burn down the poppy fields. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude here, in World War I, we learned that the world really isn't so small, that what happened thousands of miles from one country can still affect it. But it is only the province of the countries that are directly harmed by another state's actions to fight the fight. Thank you very much.
And so now, ladies and gentlemen, I call upon the second speaker, precisely because the two speakers from the same team will speak one after the other. The second speaker from Princeton to defend the motion 100 years later, the US has to stop policing the world, Mr. Brian Litchfield.
I'd like to begin by echoing Matt's thanks to everyone in attendance. We're honored to be here. We're further honored to, as Ian tells us, follow in the footsteps of one Woodrow Wilson, who may never have been president at all, if not for his strong rearing in the hallowed walls of one Princeton University. In this speech, I will build on Matt's explanation of the philosophical failures of Americans' penchant for over-intervention by offering a second prong to our argumentation, a look at the practical failures of our pretenses at policing the world. To that end, I will discuss three things. First, I will talk about how unavoidable pitfalls for the goals of American intervention undermine us. Second, I will explain how our perceived status as the world police creates a veneer of benevolence under which more selfish desires become actualized. Third, and finally, I will discuss how American intervention creates a broad notion of defining political structures only in relation to America and its superpower role. To the first, interventional failures. American interventions often fail in their immediate aims. Admittedly, there are probably too many examples of this to list in just one 5-minute speech. For a few colorful examples, though, we can look to the installation of Latin American dictators, the Vietnam War, and literally everything America has ever done in the Middle East. As American hero George W. Bush once said, "This foreign policy stuff is a little bit frustrating." But why is this stuff so difficult for America? It seems this stems from the core problems of prioritizing short-run political interests and attempting to superimpose our own values.
Point of information?
Yes.
Do you not agree, though, with privileges come responsibilities, and if the US wants to be the economic leader of the world, it needs to back that up with its military dominance?
We would say that absolutely the United States is privileged, but with that responsibility that you talk about yourself comes the responsibility of, in many cases, non-intervention. To intervene in every possible case is to abuse our power. To do things like harsh structural adjustment policies is to abuse our power because it favors us over domestic interests of the countries that we interfere with. That is the responsibility of America. So, when we have the core problems of not being able to see domestic values and trying to superimpose our own values on them, we end up not being able to see past our beliefs that say everyone needs democracy immediately, and end up unable to reconcile our own viewpoints with the necessities of a given political conflict. Sure.
Would you let China be the police of the world?
So this is an interesting question that we actually thought would come up. We think that as America steps away from its role as the world police, there might be the consideration that maybe China will step in. We think two factors sort of preempt this issue. To begin with, in stepping back, America creates the precedent that superpowers should not intervene all the time, meaning that China will have a harder time intervening by itself. Secondarily, though, we think that we open the door for multilateralism in this movement, meaning that there isn't a void at all for China to be filling. The second thing I'm going to talk about as a primary form of argumentation is that America's efforts as the world police lead to motivational clouding. And what I mean by this is that so long as America plays the part of world police, it can justify any sort of international policy on the grounds of pretentiously just and necessary policing. This leads to two core perverse incentives for politicians. First, war hawking to gain votes. If few barriers exist to intervention because of the status of being the world police, war hawk politicians will always be able to fearmonger and muster nationalism for votes by pushing for war. The only reason my conservative friend Matt here ever voted for Mitt Romney was because he was dying to go to war with China, even though he might have to acquiesce there to a trade war. This means that if America has the attitude of policing the world, the incentives of many domestic politicians will always line up with encouraging war, even if that war isn't going to be effective or just. Secondarily, we see the perverse incentive of selfish state interests. Low barriers to intervention similarly open the door towards pushing domestic interests over the interests of the countries in which we intervene. Refer to, for instance, the oil-based Iraq War. The only way to possibly check these perverse incentives is to step back entirely and allow multilateralism to seize the day. Third argument we're going to advance here is that about the ideological impressions created by intervention. Even when American intervention is ostensibly effective, it generates the lingering perception that America is a super powerful entity ready to intervene at any time. This specter of American power manifests itself in a number of ways. To begin with, individuals have trouble taking ownership of American-supported regimes. They always seem to be puppets for the American state, preventing them from ever becoming stable. Secondarily, heavily projected American power cultivates an attitude of fear, which leads to violence, as we see in terrorism. Third, though, and it's important we close on this, American power and the specter of this power precludes important multinational work by making all multinationalism look like simply American manipulation. So what has Princeton brought you today? Matt and I derive from the lessons of the past 100 years a vision of the future with decreased American influence. This means a future with better respect for sovereign rights, a future with less abject fear and political frustration, and a future where America steps back and opens up space for international flourishing. Unless, of course, George Bush's little brother Jeb takes the White House in 2016. Thank you.